Hey there, friends. Welcome to Speak Easy English. I'm James, and I'm so glad you're here today. Get ready for a story that will inspire you to take that first step toward overcoming your fears and reaching your full potential. So sit back, relax, and join me as we dive into the most inspiring story you'll hear today. A journey of resilience, courage, and the incredible power of never giving up. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like this video, and of course, subscribe to my channel. Let's get started. Life has a way of testing us, pushing us to our limits, and making us question whether we have what it takes to keep going. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, a spark of hope ignites. A moment that changes everything. Let me tell you the story of Liam, a young man who once stood at the edge of giving up. He wasn't born into wealth, talent, or privilege. In fact, he grew up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and dreams felt like distant stars, beautiful but unreachable. Liam had one big dream: to become a motivational speaker and inspire millions. But there was just one problem. He had a crippling fear of public speaking. Every time he stood in front of people, his hands shook, his voice trembled, and his mind went blank. His classmates laughed, his teachers sighed, and deep down, he felt like a failure. One day, after yet another disastrous presentation in college, Liam sat alone on a park bench, questioning everything. Maybe I'm just not meant for this, he thought. Maybe I should just accept that I'll never be good enough. But life had a different plan for Liam. What happened next would change his story forever. Liam had reached a breaking point. Every failed attempt at speaking in public chipped away at his confidence. His classmates teased him, his professors doubted him, and even his closest friends gently suggested that maybe public speaking just wasn't for him. One night, as he scrolled through social media, he came across a video of a famous speaker sharing his journey. The man had once struggled with the same fear, but had pushed through it. The only way to get better is to keep trying, the speaker said. Something about those words struck a chord. Liam knew he had two choices: give up or fight for his dream. He chose to fight. Determined, he signed up for a small local event where aspiring speakers could practice in front of a supportive audience. But when the day arrived, fear took over. His heart pounded, his palms were sweaty, and as he walked onto the stage, his voice cracked on the first word. The audience watched in silence. Panic rushed through him, and for a moment he thought about running away. Then he did something different. He took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. He stopped worrying about being perfect and focused on sharing his story. His voice was shaky, but his words were real. And when he finished, the audience didn't laugh, they clapped. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was a start. And in that moment, Liam realized something powerful. Failure wasn't the end. It was just part of the journey. Liam had always believed that passion alone was enough to achieve greatness. He thought that if he wanted something badly enough, success would eventually follow. But reality had other plans. From a young age, he admired great speakers. People who could walk onto a stage and command attention with confidence and clarity. He imagined himself standing in front of thousands, sharing stories, inspiring change, and leaving people feeling empowered. But every time he tried, his body betrayed him. His hands would shake, his voice would crack, and his mind would go completely blank. High school was the worst. In his final year, he was asked to give a presentation on a book he loved. He had prepared for weeks, practicing in front of a mirror, timing every word perfectly. But the moment he stood in front of the class, fear took over. His throat tightened, his legs wobbled, and when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. The silence felt like an eternity before the class erupted in laughter. From that day on, Liam avoided public speaking at all costs. He turned down leadership roles, refused to participate in debates, and even skipped classes when he knew he'd have to present. It was easier to blend into the background than to risk another humiliation. But deep inside, he knew he was running away from his dream. The desire to inspire people never left him, no matter how much he tried to suppress it. One day, while browsing videos online, Liam stumbled upon a TED Talk by a man who had struggled with the exact same fear. The speaker shared how he used to freeze on stage, how people doubted him, and how he almost quit. But instead of giving up, he faced his fear, one step at a time. Something about that story resonated deeply with Liam. If this man could overcome his fear, why couldn't he? That night, Liam made a bold decision. He was going to face his fear head on. He signed up for an open mic event at a small community center. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was still terrifying. As the day of the event approached, his nerves worsened. He spent hours practicing, but self-doubt crept in. What if I freeze again? What if I embarrass myself? What if people laugh? The negative thoughts were overwhelming, but he forced himself to push through. On the night of the event, Liam arrived early and watched as other speakers took the stage. Some were incredible, confident, charismatic, and engaging. Others stumbled, but the audience was supportive. Maybe they won't be so bad, he thought. Finally, it was his turn. His name was called, and his heart pounded as he walked onto the stage. The microphone felt heavier than he expected. As he looked at the audience, the fear hit him like a wave. His hands shook, his vision blurred, and his breath quickened. He felt the familiar panic rising. For a brief second, he considered walking off the stage, but then he remembered why he was there. He had a choice: run away like he always did or push through. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to speak. His voice was shaky, and his words weren't perfect, but he kept going. He told a simple story about fear and failure, his own story. At first, the audience was quiet, but as he spoke, he saw people nodding, connecting with his words. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the audience clapped, not just politely, but genuinely. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was real support. Liam stepped off the stage, his hands still trembling, but something had changed. He had done it. He had spoken in front of an audience and survived. That night he felt proud, but he also knew this was just the beginning. One speech wouldn't erase years of fear. If he wanted to truly become a great speaker, he needed to keep going. Over the next few months, he forced himself into uncomfortable situations. He joined a public speaking club where he gave speeches every week. Some were awful. He stumbled, forgot his words, and sometimes even walked off stage early. But every time he failed, he learned. There were still moments of doubt, times when he wanted to quit, when he wondered if he was making a fool of himself. But deep down, he knew that growth wasn't supposed to be easy. Every great speaker had once been a beginner. Through countless failures, something incredible happened. The fear that once controlled him started to fade. He became more comfortable in front of people. His voice grew stronger. His words carried more power. One day he was invited to speak at a bigger event. It wasn't a stadium full of people, but it was the largest crowd he had ever faced. As he stepped onto the stage, he felt a rush of nerves. But this time, he knew what to do. He took a deep breath and delivered his speech with confidence. And when he finished, the crowd stood up and applauded. For the first time in his life, Liam truly believed that he was meant to inspire others. Liam had taken the first step, but the road ahead was still full of uncertainty. One successful speech didn't mean his fear was gone. It lurked in the background, waiting for a moment of doubt to creep back in. But something had changed. He had proved to himself that he could speak in front of people without falling apart. That tiny victory planted a seed of hope inside him. Still, public speaking was far from easy. Every time he stepped on stage, he felt the familiar rush of anxiety. His hands trembled, his throat tightened, and the fear of failure loomed over him. But now, instead of avoiding it, he leaned into the discomfort. He realized that fear wasn't his enemy. It was a sign that he was growing. One evening, after a small speaking event, an older man approached him. His name was Mr. Carter, a retired public speaker who had spent years coaching nervous presenters. "I saw your speech tonight," Mr. Carter said with a kind smile. "You've got something special, Liam, but you're holding yourself back. You're letting fear control you." Liam hesitated. "I just don't know how to stop being afraid," he admitted. "You don't," Mr. Carter said. "Fear never goes away completely, but you learn to speak with it, not against it. If you're serious about this, I can help." Liam was shocked. A real mentor? Someone willing to teach him? He didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately. Mr. Carter didn't just teach techniques, he challenged Liam's mindset. "Your problem isn't speaking," he told Liam one day. "It's your belief about yourself. Every time you get on stage, you're convinced you'll fail. We're going to change that." The training was intense. Mr. Carter made Liam practice in the most uncomfortable situations. Speaking in front of mirrors and recording himself. Practicing speeches in front of strangers at coffee shops. Delivering impromptu talks in public places. At first it was awful. Liam stuttered, his voice shook, and sometimes he wanted to run away. But little by little, he started noticing changes. He no longer froze when people looked at him. He learned to pause and breathe instead of panicking. His voice grew steadier, his words clearer. Each small victory built his confidence. The Liam who once dreaded standing in front of a class was now speaking to groups of 20, then 50, then even larger crowds. One day, Mr. Carter gave Liam a challenge that terrified him. "I signed you up for a citywide speaking competition," he said. "You're going to compete against professionals." Liam's stomach dropped. "I'm not ready for that," he protested. "You'll never feel ready," Mr. Carter replied. "But you are ready." Liam spent weeks preparing. He practiced every day, refining his speech, working on his delivery. But as the competition date approached, fear crept back in. What if I choke? What if I forget my words? What if I make a fool of myself? The night before the event, he almost backed out. But then he remembered something Mr. Carter had told him. Fear is proof that what you're doing matters. Don't run from it. Use it. The day of the competition arrived. As Liam stepped onto the massive stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, his heart pounded. The fear was there, but this time, he didn't let it control him. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and reminded himself why he was there. The words flowed naturally. He didn't rush. He didn't let doubt creep in. He looked people in the eye, connected with them, and for the first time in his life, he felt free on stage. When he finished, there was silence. Then the crowd erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering. Liam's hands shook, but not from fear. This time, it was from pure excitement. He hadn't just spoken, he had owned the stage. That night, as he held the award for second place in his hands, Liam realized something incredible. He was no longer the scared boy who avoided public speaking. Liam walked off the competition stage with his heart still racing. The applause still echoed in his ears, and he could barely believe what had just happened. He had done it. He had faced one of his biggest fears and walked away victorious. Not because he had won first place, but because, for the first time, he felt in control of his fear instead of letting it control him. That night, as he sat with Mr. Carter over coffee, his mentor looked at him with pride. "You did it, Liam," he said. "How do you feel?" Liam thought for a moment. "Honestly, I feel unstoppable." Mr. Carter chuckled. "Good, because this is just the beginning." Liam had spent years believing he was someone who simply couldn't speak in public. He had convinced himself that fear meant he wasn't capable, but now he saw the truth. Fear wasn't a stop sign. It was a signal that he was stepping into something important. Instead of avoiding challenges, he started seeking them out. He signed up for more speaking events, pushing himself to improve with every opportunity. He began attending networking events, connecting with professional speakers, and even studying the greats, watching their techniques, their pacing, their confidence. But one thing set Liam apart. He never forgot where he started. He knew what it felt like to be paralyzed by fear, to feel like no one believed in him, to struggle with self-doubt. And because of that, he wanted to help others overcome their own fears. One day, after a small local event, a young woman approached him. "Liam," she said nervously, "I just wanted to say, your speech really inspired me. I have terrible stage fright, and I thought I'd never be able to speak in public. But after hearing your story, I think maybe I can try." Her words hit Liam like a wave. He had spent years feeling like he wasn't good enough, and now, his journey was helping someone else believe in themselves. That night, he made a decision. He wasn't just going to become a speaker. He was going to help others find their voices, just like Mr. Carter had helped him. Months passed, and Liam continued growing. His confidence soared, his speeches became stronger, and his presence on stage became undeniable. Then, one day, an email arrived in his inbox. It was an invitation to give a TEDx talk. Liam stared at the screen, hardly believing it. A TEDx talk? Him? The kid who once froze in front of a high school classroom? Fear crept in, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the fear of failure. It was the fear of stepping into something bigger than he had ever imagined. Liam's heart raced as he stood backstage, just moments before his TEDx talk was about to begin. The familiar nerves that used to paralyze him still lurked, but instead of a wave of panic, they felt like a surge of energy, his body's way of telling him that he was about to do something big. He had come so far from the terrified young man who could barely speak in front of a class. Now he was about to stand in front of an audience of hundreds, no, thousands, and share his story. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the low hum of excitement as people took their seats. The lights were dimmed, the audience was waiting, and the stage manager gave him a thumbs up. "Just breathe," Liam whispered to himself. "You've got this." He had worked tirelessly for months, honing his speech, practicing every word, refining his delivery, and visualizing his success. He had prepared for this moment, and he knew that all of his failures, setbacks, and small victories had led him to this point. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had worked for. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on him. For a moment, he felt a wave of self-doubt, but then he remembered the journey he had taken to get here. He thought about the countless hours of practice, the speeches that went horribly wrong, the people who doubted him, and the many nights when he almost gave up. He had come so far, and now he was here. As he looked out at the audience, he didn't see hundreds of judgmental eyes. He saw a group of people eager to hear his story. He saw people who might be struggling with the same fear he once had, the fear that kept them from chasing their dreams. And in that moment, he knew he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for all the people who needed to hear that fear didn't have to control their lives. Liam took a deep breath and began. The speech flowed effortlessly. Every word felt natural. Every sentence connected with the audience. He spoke with conviction, with passion, and with the belief that his story could inspire others. The fear was still there, but it no longer had a hold on him. Instead of letting it paralyze him, he used it to fuel his performance. The nerves had transformed into excitement, driving him to connect with his audience on a deeper level. He shared his journey, the self-doubt, the failures, the challenges, and how he had learned to embrace his fear instead of running from it. He spoke about the moment when he realized that fear was a sign of growth, a sign that he was pushing himself to do something meaningful. He talked about his mentor, Mr. Carter, and how the lessons he had learned from him had shaped his mindset. He spoke of the importance of taking action, even when the road ahead seemed impossible. As Liam spoke, he could see the audience nodding along. He could see people leaning forward, hanging on to every word. He could feel the connection building between him and the crowd, and it was exhilarating. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just speaking to fill the silence. He was speaking to make a difference. When he reached the conclusion of his talk, there was no dramatic pause, no overly rehearsed ending. Instead, he simply said, "The most inspiring story you'll hear today is not mine. It's yours, because you too can overcome your fears and become the person you're meant to be. It's not about waiting for the fear to go away. It's about moving forward despite it. The journey will be hard. There will be setbacks, but with each step you will grow stronger. And one day you'll look back and realize that you've become exactly who you always wanted to be." There was a beat of silence, and then the audience erupted into applause. The sound of clapping filled the room, and Liam stood there, overwhelmed with emotion. His hands shook, his heart raced, and tears welled up in his eyes. He wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline from the speech or the realization of how far he had come, but in that moment, he knew he had made it. The applause didn't last forever, but the feeling of accomplishment did. As Liam stepped off the stage, he was met by Mr. Carter, who was waiting for him with a proud smile. "You did it," Mr. Carter said, his voice full of warmth. "You showed them who you really are." Liam smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you." But as much as he appreciated his mentor's support, Liam knew something now. He had always had the power to do this himself. It wasn't the mentorship or the practice that had carried him across the finish line. It was the decision to believe in himself. After the TEDx talk, Liam's life changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. His speech went viral, spreading across social media and inspiring thousands of people around the world. Messages of gratitude poured in from strangers who had been touched by his story. People told him that they too were facing their own fears, and because of his words, they felt ready to take action. But what truly amazed Liam was the way his story had inspired others to pursue their own dreams. People who had been afraid to speak up found the courage to share their voices. Aspiring speakers reached out to him for advice. Even people in other fields began to push through their fears, whether it was asking for a promotion, starting a new business, or pursuing a lifelong passion. Liam had become more than just a speaker. He had become a catalyst for change. His story of overcoming fear had sparked a ripple effect that reached far beyond the walls of the TEDx stage. He began traveling the world, giving talks and workshops not just about overcoming fear, but about taking action in the face of adversity. He helped others discover their own potential, teaching them that the only thing standing between them and their dreams was the courage to take that first step. Every time he stood on stage, he felt the same nerves, the same excitement, the same sense of purpose. But each time, he remembered the lessons he had learned, the importance of embracing fear, of pushing through setbacks, and of believing in yourself, even when the world doubts you. Liam's story wasn't just about triumphing over public speaking. It was about triumphing over life's biggest obstacles. It was about showing others that no matter how impossible the road seemed, they had the power to carve their own path. And with each person he inspired, Liam's belief in himself grew stronger. Because the true victory wasn't in the applause or the accolades. It was in knowing that he had made a difference, that his story had touched lives, and that he was living proof that it was never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Liam had not only conquered his fear, he had transformed his life. And in doing so, he had become the most inspiring story anyone would hear that day. The applause was deafening. Liam stood there, momentarily frozen, as the overwhelming sound of clapping and cheers reverberated in his ears. He hadn't expected such a powerful response, but what struck him most wasn't the applause. It was the feeling that washed over him, a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and pride. For years he had imagined this moment, but now that it had arrived, he realized that the true triumph wasn't just the standing ovation, it was everything he had conquered to get to this point. He had spoken at large events before, but this moment felt different. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. The doubts he had once held about himself, the countless times he had feared failure, and the nights he had considered giving up. All of those struggles had led to this powerful affirmation. He had done it. But more importantly, he had become someone who believed he could do it. As Liam made his way off the stage, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw Mr. Carter, his mentor, standing there with a wide smile and a look of pride in his eyes. "You were incredible," Mr. Carter said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've come so far." Liam, still overwhelmed, smiled back. I never would have believed I could do this without your guidance. You've given me the tools, but I had to find the courage myself. Mr. Carter nodded, and you did. That's what makes this moment even more powerful. You've learned to trust yourself. As Liam walked away from the stage, still basking in the afterglow of the experience, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the struggles, the setbacks, the lessons learned, and the people who had supported him along the way. He had gone from a person paralyzed by fear to someone who embraced challenges, knowing that growth came from pushing through discomfort. The days following the TEDx talk were a whirlwind. Liam's speech had garnered attention far beyond what he could have imagined. It spread quickly on social media, with thousands of people commenting, sharing, and reaching out to him to express how much his words had resonated. For the first time, Liam realized the true power of vulnerability. By sharing his story of fear, failure, and eventual triumph, he had touched the hearts of so many people. His experience had become a symbol of hope for others who were struggling with their own insecurities and fears. Among the messages was one that stood out. A young woman named Maria, who had struggled with social anxiety for years. She had never been able to speak in public, not even in front of a small group. But after hearing Liam's TEDx talk, she found the courage to join a local speaking club. Maria wrote to Liam, "I just wanted to thank you. You've given me hope. I've been terrified of speaking for as long as I can remember, but after hearing your story, I signed up for a public speaking class. I'm taking it one step at a time, but your talk helped me believe that I can do it. If you can overcome your fear, maybe I can too." Liam read her message several times, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that this was what it was all about, not just standing in front of an audience and speaking, but inspiring others to find their own courage. Maria wasn't the only one. Liam received hundreds of similar messages from people around the world who had been touched by his journey. It was humbling, and it reinforced the idea that his story wasn't just his own. It was a story that could help countless others. In the weeks that followed, Liam was approached by more individuals looking for advice on overcoming their own fears. He began hosting workshops, mentoring aspiring speakers, and giving talks at schools and universities. Each time he shared his story, he could see the same spark of hope light up in the eyes of his listeners. He wasn't just teaching them how to speak in front of a crowd, he was teaching them how to embrace their fears and move forward with confidence. One of the most rewarding moments came when a young man, David, who had struggled with a speech impediment, approached Liam after one of his workshops. David had spent his entire life avoiding speaking situations because of his stutter. But after hearing Liam's story, he decided to take a chance and speak at an open mic event. "I've never spoken in front of a crowd before," David admitted, his voice shaky. "But after hearing your talk, I feel like I have to try. If you can overcome your fear, maybe I can too." Liam smiled and placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect. Just take it one step at a time. Your voice matters, and the world needs to hear it." David went on to speak at the event. It wasn't perfect, but it was an enormous victory for him. And for Liam, watching David step up to the mic, it was another reminder that true triumph wasn't about achieving personal success alone. It was about empowering others to find their own path to victory. With his newfound purpose and momentum, Liam's career took off. Invitations to speak at conferences, corporate events, and leadership summits came flooding in. He had gone from the guy who couldn't speak in front of a classroom to the one being sought after to inspire and lead others. His TEDx talk had opened doors that once seemed impossible to unlock. But more than the accolades, the invitations, and the recognition, Liam found joy in the impact he was making. He wasn't just achieving success for himself. He was helping others find their voice, overcome their obstacles, and push past their fears. Each new speech, each new workshop, and each new connection brought him closer to his purpose. The nervousness before each event never fully disappeared, but it no longer controlled him. He learned to welcome it as a sign of growth, a reminder that he was stepping out of his comfort zone and into something meaningful. As Liam looked back on his journey, from his humble beginnings to the stage where he now stood, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had come so far, not just in his career, but in his own personal growth. And as he looked forward, he knew that the journey was far from over. He had achieved one triumph, but there were countless more to come. The greatest triumph, however, was not in the applause, the recognition, or the accolades. It was in the knowledge that he had transformed his life. He had embraced his fears, taken action despite them, and shown others that they too could do the same. His journey had inspired countless others to take their own first steps, and that ripple effect was the true measure of his success. Liam's story isn't just one of personal triumph. It's a reminder that every single person has the power to overcome their fears. It's not about being perfect. It's about pushing through when the odds feel stacked against you. It's about realizing that fear doesn't have to define your life or hold you back from pursuing your dreams. Every setback, every failure, every challenge along the way is an opportunity to learn, grow, and evolve. This journey, like so many others, wasn't just about Liam stepping onto a stage and delivering a speech. No, the real story was about how he learned to face his inner fears, how he built the courage to walk forward despite them. For years, Liam saw fear as a wall, something that separated him from his potential. But over time, he realized that fear was never the enemy. It was the catalyst for change, the force that pushed him to evolve. When he made the decision to embrace his fear, that was the moment everything changed. And that's what this story is all about, embracing the fear. It's about realizing that no matter where you are in your journey, no matter how big or small your goal may seem, you have the strength and the resilience to move forward. You can choose to let fear hold you back, or you can choose to use it as a tool to fuel your growth. Fear can either be a paralyzing force or an energizing one. It's all about perspective and how you decide to approach it. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. The secret is in starting, in taking that first step, no matter how small it may seem. Just like Liam, you'll make mistakes, you'll stumble, but it's in those moments that you will learn the most. It's in those challenges where the greatest growth happens. Remember, the biggest breakthroughs happen outside your comfort zone. It's easy to stay where it's safe, where you're not challenged, but nothing great ever comes from playing it safe. Liam's story shows us that the real triumphs don't come from avoiding fear. They come from facing it head-on and finding the strength to push through it. Every victory, no matter how small, adds up to a life that's filled with purpose and meaning. As you reflect on Liam's journey, think about your own life. What is holding you back? What fears have you been avoiding? Is there something you've always wanted to do, but the fear of failure has stopped you? Take a moment to ask yourself, what would happen if you stepped forward instead of stepping back? What if you chose to take that first step today? It doesn't matter if it's big or small. The point is that you start. Now, I want to leave you with this thought. Your story is still being written. You are the hero of your own journey, and the next chapter is waiting to be written. The challenges you face today will become the triumphs of tomorrow. You have the power to change your own narrative. No matter where you are in life, no matter what obstacles you face, remember that you can overcome anything if you choose to take action. Liam's story proves that change is possible, and it all starts with one decision: to move forward even when you're scared. It doesn't matter how many times you've stumbled in the past. What matters is that you choose to stand up again, stronger than before. So here's my challenge to you. Take that first step. The journey won't be easy, but it will be worth it. You have the power to transform your life, to break free from the chains of fear and to achieve things you never thought possible. Don't let fear dictate your future. Let your courage define it. If you've been inspired by Liam's story and want to start your own journey of overcoming fear and embracing growth, make the decision today. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start right where you are and keep moving forward. And remember, every small victory brings you closer to the life you've always dreamed of. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story inspiring, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories and lessons that can help you transform your life. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a little encouragement today. Let's make fear a thing of the past and turn our dreams into reality, one step at a time. You have everything you need to succeed. It's time to believe in yourself. Stay brave, stay bold, and always keep moving forward.